President Cyril Ramaphosa has wrapped up a state visit to China, which was followed by the 2024 summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. China has pledged $51 billion in new funding for Africa for the next 3 years. There were also promises of supporting infrastructure projects across the continent. And for more on what this means, let's talk now to Professor Catherine Namakula, a legal academic at the University of the Free State. Good morning, Professor.
Yes, good morning to you.
Thank you so much.
And good morning to our listeners.
Thank you for joining us. Now, as President Ramaphosa returns from his state visit to China, what single outcome from this trip will have the most profound impact on South Africa's future trajectory?
Thank you very much for that. I think from this we can see the commitment to actually challenge the unipolar world, to having a multipolar world where there are various centers of power, and from which the developing South is very much committed and can really benefit from.
And can you elaborate on the strategic importance of South Africa's relationship with China?
Absolutely. I think we should position this in history, whereby Africa did commit after the World Conference Against Racism to actually developing cooperation with its former colonizers as a continent in order to develop as a continent. But 20 years from now, we are seeing that Africa is still actually now frustrated by the micromanagement from the West. It has more debts, and its resources are actually not actually getting the market that they should have in the Western world. So we are having China offering another alternative or possibility, opening its markets as it has done. It has provided 100% duty-free access to its market to Africa, which Africa is seeing as a big opportunity for it to market its products, and in what it sees as a partnership other than a big brother relationship.
How does this visit align with South Africa's foreign policy objectives?
Absolutely. As we have said, South Africa has now more possibilities to engage. As we can see previously, the West, following the South Africa's intervention at the ICC, it did reconsider. America did reconsider its membership to AGOR. So we are having more markets for South African products right now. We are seeing the infrastructure connectivity projects that China is also offering. We are seeing exchange programs in terms of education, emergency food assistance to Africa. So China is putting forward, tabling a big promise which South Africa can benefit from.
Is South Africa getting a fair deal from Chinese investments?
It's promised as such on paper, but the implementation is yet to show, because there are standards that South Africa needs to meet to actually benefit from this partnership or cooperation, as you may call it. So it will depend on whether actually South Africa is able to meet these goals, which is usually the big question. Does it have the infrastructure on the ground to actually produce for the big market, to actually meet the standards to access the market, or to actually benefit from these mutually advanced proposals on the table?
Professor, there are concerns that China is deliberately extending loans to African countries under terms that are difficult to repay, so that borrowers will have to surrender assets when they default. What's your take on this?
It's a big concern, and it's not predictable from now how China would decide to respond to that. But it's a genuine concern as to whether Africa will actually be able to meet these loans that are so attractive, concession loans, soft loans, that are easy to take to a continent that is actually seeking capital. It's seeking transfer of technology. And yet Africa has very good raw materials and resources to offer, but it's also yet to be determined whether the value on the market will be offered for those products in order for it to actually have enough value to meet or pay up the loans. There is no precedent to that. Africa has not met those obligations in the past and has had to rely on debt waivers. We are yet to see what happens in this particular instance.
How transparent are the terms and conditions of Chinese loans to African countries?
That's the unique aspect. They're not looking at this. Africa is not looking at this as gimmicks. They appear to be real because China is also seeking a global partner in challenging the unipolar world, challenging the dollar, but there are also terms that are on the table as well. China is very clear about Africa having to recognize its one China policy. As Taiwan and Congo and Hong Kong being part of China is a demand that actually China has put on the table, which Africa may have a different consideration about. So it may want to define Africa's agenda using this very need that Africa advances at this time. And also, it is quite clear that Africa does not yet have the capacity to actually benefit from these terms, or to actually even in the long term to meet these the demands of these concession loans. But China has provided some money for capacity building, and that's about 550 billion US dollars in terms of grants to Africa. So we are seeing a different dynamic to that. So in a way, it's presented as a commitment to help the continent even build its capacity to actually meet the demands on the table. But it's a long way to go.
Yeah. Professor, are there any alternative funding sources or models that African countries can explore to reduce their reliance on Chinese loans?
I think currently we can say that this is a big opportunity on the table. If Africa can steer up its capacity in terms of infrastructure, take advantage of what is put on the table. There are many African countries that have been making huge advancements in terms of infrastructure development. Now that they are considering connectivity of Cape Town to Cairo, it's a good opportunity to promote the Africa Free Trade Area, whereby Africa can actually retain its capital and be able to build its potential to actually be to trade meaningfully and be able to also meet its external need. So internally, Africa can really meet its own needs and generate capital. There are issues to do or advancements that can be made in the energy sector that can actually increase or see the continent develop from production to productivity level. And in terms of also technology advancements, benefiting from technology advancements around the world, making its industrialization real, there's still great opportunity that Africa can benefit, reinforce itself internally so that it can be able to meaningfully engage with China and all these other partners. We should see from the engagement itself. We are seeing China, like the US, engaging as a country with the continent. So it's one country against 54 states lumped together. We are seeing many heads of states, but majority actually appearing for this and all being lumped together, unlike where we see the EU as a continent engaging with another continent. So that tells you already the leverage that Africa has on that. It has never been in control of the narrative. So we need to get to that level. There's a lot of work that needs to be done.
President Ramaphosa said South Africa had reached an agreement with China on aspects of its energy security. So how is China performing in terms of its own energy security?
Very well in terms of solar power production, and this is the direction in which we need to go as a country and as a continent. So there are prospects in that. That was also factored into the summit.
Fantastic. Professor, thank you so much for your time and just coming through for us there. Of course, this is the professor from the University of the Free State, Professor Catherine Namakula.